If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Belgium announced it will deploy soldiers to Brussels to combat escalating drug gang violence, largely tied to North African groups like the Morocco Mafia. Interior Minister Bernard Quinton said the Army's presence would restore public confidence as gangs no longer fear police but still fear soldiers. Mixed police-military patrols will target Brussels and other affected cities, including Antwerp and Ghent. Shootings have surged, with 57 victims this year, while arrests have tripled. Prosecutors urge tougher prison controls and faster deportations. The move mirrors U.S. National Guard deployments in crime hotspots. The FBI and American Bankers Association have warned that AI-generated deepfakes are fueling scams, with losses from fraud exceeding $50 billion since 2020. Criminals increasingly impersonate family members, officials, or celebrities through manipulated video, audio, or images to trick victims into sending money or information. Red flags include blurred facial features, off-sync audio, unnatural voices, or urgent emotional manipulation. Elderly individuals are especially vulnerable to deepfake phishing scams. The global economic impact is expected to reach $40 billion by 2027. Lawmakers have introduced bipartisan legislation to combat AI-enabled fraud and better protect American consumers. Thousands of demonstrators marched through Paris on Saturday, demanding President Emmanuel Macron's resignation and France's withdrawal from the EU. Macron's approval ratings have plunged to record lows amid budget deficits and unpopular austerity plans, with 80% of citizens expressing distrust. Protesters carried Frexit signs and opposed arms deliveries to Ukraine. Prime Minister François Bayrou, facing a no-confidence vote Monday, has proposed major cuts to jobs, pensions, and welfare, which critics say prioritize military spending. Unions plan wider strikes under the slogan "Let's block everything" later this week. Over 300 South Korean workers detained in a massive federal immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia will be released and repatriated, South Korea announced. The September 4th operation, the largest workplace raid in Homeland Security investigations history, arrested 475 people, mostly South Korean nationals. Video showed agents lining up and shackling detainees. The plant, a Hyundai-LG Energy joint venture to build EV batteries, is one of Georgia's largest economic projects. Workers were sent to a detention center in Folkestone. South Korea expressed concern and regret, sending diplomats to the site. U.S. authorities said the investigation is ongoing with no charges yet filed. Lucy Connolly, British mother jailed for a year over a tweet, announced at Reform UK's annual conference that she plans to work with Nigel Farage's party on justice reform. Introduced as Britain's favorite political prisoner, Connolly described her experience in prison and argued that most female inmates need housing, rehab, and mental health support rather than incarceration. She criticized the judicial backlog and said her harsh sentence was politically motivated after riots linked to a mass stabbing. Reformers suggested passing Lucy's law to allow reviews of unjust sentences. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke about the latest Senate hearing face-off against Democratic lawmakers.
In some cases, millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry, so they don't want to hear the answers to the questions that they ask me. They want to make a little speech and then shut me down. But they can't deny the fact that we did worse than COVID, that the CDC is a broken agency. We did worse in COVID than any country in the world. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's COVID deaths. We literally we're the worst team in the league.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
And welcome back. It's a Tuesday. We're on the Gold Coast, the centre of intelligence and lubrilips, that sort of stuff on the Gold Coast in Australia. We're actually getting our beach back too, so contrary to the rumours that I've been spreading, we do have a beach. Got some very exciting things happening on the Country Telegraph today, looking at all things to do with the land, and some good, some bad. but it's better that we know about it in the first place, and I think you would agree. I want to play this clip. It's from our friends at Sky News, and it's the growing anger amongst New South Wales farmers amidst Labor's aggressive blind push towards net zero. Cam, play anger.
There's growing anger in the bush in regards to net zero, and we've been raising these stories for the last couple of weeks, both here and through the Daily Telegraph. But basically there's a concern from farmers today via the New South Wales Farmers Association that landowners who agree to host wind turbines and solar farms for 20, 30 years, it's a very lucrative upfront agreement that guarantees you a payment every year between now and probably, 2055, when hopefully we've saved the planet by then. But the concern today is that there is not enough security in regards to the cleanup and the rehabilitation of these farms when the turbines reach end of life. The stories we've run in the last few days indicate that each turbine costs about $480,000 to $600,000 to bring down. The concrete gets covered up. You've got to pull about all these parts. There's big cranes, there's trucks, there's 30-odd workers. And you imagine you're hosting 10 of these turbines, $600,000 each. That's $6 million that the green energy company is meant to pay in the decades ahead. The problem is there's no guarantee that they'll do that, and farmers are now saying we want a bit more security from the government.
Well, just don't put the wind farm on your property would be a good answer to the problem, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're worried about having to pay all this money at the end, you don't have to pay any money at the end if you don't put it up. And this is, of course, the concern of the neighbours of these farmers who are saying yes to these wind farms, is that they get a financial windfall in the short term, the ones who take on the wind farms. The neighbours next door have to deal with the fallout and potentially having their land devalued because of it. So is this not just comeuppance? That you sold out your neighbours and your community to make money in the short term, that you then basically have to hand back over in the long term to deal with this problem?
Yes, but it's not an excuse at the same time. And Chris Minns is refusing to introduce a bond which would require wind companies to pay for the cost of decommissioning them up front, because he's saying that would cost over $1 billion. But if you're going to have to pay for those costs at the end, why don't you just pay for them at the start and give people some security that they're not going to be left next to a decrepit, rundown, decommissioned wind farm in prime agricultural real estate? And what are we going to be left with if these wind energy companies don't fulfill their obligations, don't decommission the wind farms, if they go bust, for example, and farmers don't do it either? Are we just going to have a countryside landscape that's littered with these rundown, useless wind turbines? I mean, they're basically useless already, but that's where we're heading, right? And I just think it's ridiculous that they're being able to put these farms in all over the place with no assurances about what's going to happen on the other side.
Well, and the other concern is that a lot of farmers, and sure, I think it's buyer beware, but when your whole job is running cattle and you've done that for generations, and someone comes in and says, here's $200,000 for every year for the next 30 years. Just sign there and it'll all be okay.
Yeah.
In 5 years, they don't answer the phone. In 10 years, they don't have a website. And all of a sudden, you're like, hey, this thing's breaking down. I don't know what happens. And the governments, as you say, should be upfront. Like with mining, with any mine, you've got to pay the money up front so that at the end of life, you have a rehabilitation plan at the end. We're not doing that here. And I think one of the problems is we're on this aggressive, just blind push towards net zero. And it means that the government hasn't actually sat back and said, hey, that's going to be a problem. This contract's a problem. There's a loophole here. They've just said, just do it, allow the private sector to build it, and we'll work it out later on. And it just gets to the psyche of this whole thing.
I think what it really proves is what a scam this whole thing is. I mean, you know, if this bond scheme costs $1.3 billion, and they don't want to do that because it'll scare off investment, well, then there's just no appetite to invest, is there? I mean, the market is meant to be able to decide what sort of energy mix we have. I think that's the best way to work these things out, because, I mean, it's you and I who have to pay for it eventually through our power bills. So the market is dictated to some degree by the consumer, and it's also dictated by the investor. If the investor can't get value for money, then the projects don't go ahead. So the government is essentially admitting that these projects do not stack up. And you'll remember a few years ago the great work of Nick Cater, who went out and filmed one of these, graveyards, basically, of these wind turbines that had been decommissioned and left out the back of Queensland somewhere. That's what they do with them. They're just leaving them there, doing nothing with them. If people don't want to pay the money, well, then we don't get wind farms.
But the problem is, at this point, the market has been so distorted by billions of dollars of government subsidies. And if you have messaging to an industry that coal is over, coal is done, who the heck is going to be maintaining coal plants? Like, obviously, people will move to renewables, even though it is not the best, most reliable form of energy in Australia.
Well, particularly when it's been reported this week that a couple of the companies that are getting the most lucrative subsidies, where the government basically guarantees a minimum and a maximum spend and taxpayers are liable for any lost earnings, are BP. BP have three projects and, a Malaysian oil giant run by the Malaysian government. And people go, well, hang on, they're polluting overseas probably more than ever, and yet they're just taking advantage of these crazy subsidies that would never be offered to any.
So there you are. That's and it's a dilemma. I heard part of the conversation was, why would they do it? It's because they need the money. As simple as that. And even though in the long term it probably won't be good for you, but you don't worry about that. When they're already screaming for some sort of income, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, even though that horse may end up coming last in the Melbourne Cup. I've got to play this one too. This is Charles Godby, who's just a farmer in the UK. And this applies to Australia too. This is the reason why we need to make sure that we shop locally, look after your local farmers, your local produce. If it means instead of going to the supermarket, just go to the just go to the local greengrocer or your what's other shops, and the health food shops and stuff. Look after them too. Cam, could you play Support Farming, please?
September the 10th is the NFU's Back British Farming Day. But why should we even back British farming? Well, maybe it's because you want to do more for the environment. UK farmers have some of the highest environmental and sustainability standards in the entire world. So when you buy British produce, you're helping to protect and enhance the countryside and the environment to reduce emissions and our impact on global warming. Or it could be because you want to do more for the economy. UK agriculture pumps £13.7 billion annually into the UK economy, and when it's part of the wider agri-food sector, it's an enormous £153 billion. Maybe it's for your own health and well-being. Poor diet costs the UK £268 billion annually. So by switching away from chemically produced, processed and ultra-processed junk foods to more natural, local and seasonal where possible diets, you're not only investing in your own health and well-being, you're also helping to take the burden off our already overstretched NHS system. Or it could be about jobs. UK farming employs 462,000 people. And again, as part of the wider agri-food sector, it's 4.2 million people. For me personally though, it's nothing more than about having the best food and making the most out of every single mouthful. I believe we've lost our connection with food, and it's become little more than just a necessity to keep us alive. By understanding what we eat, where it's come from, how it's produced and by whom, and following that story right the way through to preparing our food and putting it on our plates, we can turn what's nothing more than just an average meal into a fabulous dining experience. So whatever your reason for backing British farming, please do so and enable us to back you and support you and give you the food and the environment that you deserve.
Before we get into our next guest, just a couple of little ones here. We celebrate farming in every country, and we should celebrate it even more. In Queensland, they had an initiative there from one of the media groups to vote for Queensland's top young farmer. We'll play this one, Cam, if you could play Bell.
I bloody told ya. Look at the moon. Look at the rainbow sky. It's the little things in life. Sometimes I get so caught up in life that I don't even realise that I'm living the life that I've always dreamt of. Out on the land, with my horses, my dogs just free roaming. Trained Buzz when I was 16 years old. I never had working dogs before him. Mum and Dad never had working dogs before him. So 16-year-old me was learning, and so was he. You see how the dogs are staying perfectly still because they know their commands. Here's a few of the cattle, clearly hungry in a paddock that has not much food. All right, go. Go, push him up. Push him up is push him up, adds a little bit more pressure because sometimes Buzz is a little unsure and he needs a bit of encouragement. Push him up, push him up.
There you are. We take this program very seriously, as you can see, but 25-year-old Grazier, she paid for that farm. I'll play you another video in the week and we'll get her on the air too to talk about how she did so well. She also has her OnlyFans channel, 800,000 followers, and they have also helped her buy property. But it does show you, if you think outside the box, as Jeremy Clarkson has done, you can actually, you may find little treasures. Now, Jeremy Clarkson, I make no bones about it. I absolutely love the guy. I think he is just hilarious and does things differently. For example, he has a new form of rotary hoeing or hoeing the soil. Cam, can you play Tank? Stop, thank you. Cam likes tanks, obviously. So there you are. That's just some of the things that are happening around the world. Jeremy Clarkson, he will make an appearance, most likely every day, with some of the things he does, because he is promoting farming in the UK, and we should be doing the same. You know, not just for the UK, but for Australia too. We're going to talk about Property Rights Australia and government overreach. Jim Wilmott is a long-term defender of the rights of regional communities. Inspired by his love for rural Queensland, Jim has led many successful initiatives protecting the rights of farmers and their properties, and played an active role in many organisations. Not just sitting on the fence, he actually rolls up the sleeves and gets into it. Stands up to government and commercial entities that ride roughshod over people's livelihoods and property rights. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here with you, Mike.
Would you like one of Jeremy Clarkson's tanks?
Mate, I could do a lot of work with that tank. It'd be good to take out the odd feral pig or two as well, Mike.
Yeah, an entire neighbourhood in one shot. Good on you. Tell me this, before we get into what is Property Rights Australia, I look at these wind farms or these turbines or windmills, and I just mentioned riding roughshod. I mean, it almost is when they plonk these things on the land, and even though they're paying the farmer, because the farmer needs the money, he's not doing it because he thinks it's generally not doing it because he thinks it's a good idea. He's doing it because, or she's doing it because that farmer needs the money. Is this a form of still riding roughshod over the farmers?
Oh, definitely, because a lot of farmers sign up on the promises from these renewable developers. They call them greasers. They come in, they select a few farmers, and it actually divides the community. That they promise the world, and sure, some payments for these wind turbines, you know, around $40,000 to $50,000. But what they don't realise is all the heartache that comes with it if you sign up. And that things like you're responsible for the contamination of your neighbour's land if the project developer defaults if there's any contamination through whether it's oil, whether it's glass, whether it's microplastics. You're responsible, like potentially for decommissioning if the project developer defaults. And we've seen a lot of these projects that get sold multiple times, 4, 5, 6 times. And landholders need to understand, if they're thinking of signing up, get some good legal advice. Don't just use the developer's lawyer. They are experts in getting what's best for them and giving as little to you as possible. Look, I just wish people wouldn't sign up, because the only people that benefit are potentially the host when they do get some money, Mike, and the developer themselves. It's certainly not the communities and the neighbours.
I totally agree with you. What is Property Rights Australia?
Property Rights Australia is a community organisation. We've been around for 22 years. We're grassroots. We're not astroturfed like a lot of the Labor and Teals think we are. We don't receive any money from big multinational companies. And what we do, we stand up for people's private property rights. So whether you live in town, in a house, a small block, right out to big sprawling stations out west. So we think that if you own private property, Mike, you should be able to have exclusive access use, and dare I say, Mike, the opportunity to make a bit of profit. But that doesn't mean your private property rights, and I guess having your private property rights, you're allowed to affect the property rights of others, your neighbours, the community amenity, and the environment that's off your property.
Is the landscape, I don't mean just the look of it, but the landscape, is it changing? Is government councils, are they becoming more pretty draconian? Especially on the land, farmers are doing it tough. Are they this neighbourhood? Because I lived in the bush for a lot. I was brought up in the bush, and by the way, left as soon as I could too. But the old Aussie that would lean over the fence and say, "G'day, mate. How you going? What can I do for you?" Is that still there, or is it all sort of diminishing now that has become very corporate and this essence of the Australian farmer? Is that still there, or is it just more of a corporate image and entity?
No, it's still there and truly alive. I'm sure there's some corporates in there, some big businesses, but generally the medium-sized small farms, it's still there, and the true Aussie culture, helping each other out, help your neighbours out, help your community out, is still there. But what we're drowning under a sea of red tape, Mike. Just for me, I'm a beef producer in the South Burnett, Kingaroy, the home of peanuts. Well, it was anyway. So just to send beef out my gate on transport on a truck, there's 76 pieces of individual legislation at a state level and codes of practice that I have to abide to as a landholder. So I'm more busy in the office, Mike, than I should be out and improving my productivity. And that's why Australia's productivity generally is going down, because we are just stifling under the weight of bureaucracy and red tape at a local, state and federal level.
We often hear and read about and see government's attempts to look after the environment. And if you chop down a tree that is the only tree of its kind for 100 metres or something, they're going to fine you, trillions and trillions of dollars and make your life miserable. How do we get around that? Because it is there, the environmentalists, you can't, your property, your farm or your acreage, in many ways, it's not yours anyway. It belongs to the government, because they can tell you exactly how you are to look after it, can't they?
Oh, definitely. And it's all about negligence of legislation is no excuse anymore for farmers. You need to keep up to date with changes in vegetation mapping at a state level. I think in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been 13 changes, and the colours constantly change. What really affects farmers as well is they're painted by these environmental groups that we see now get a lot of dark money from questionable organisations overseas. That they're portraying us as environmental vandals in growing the food and fibre that feeds not only all Australians, but 70 to 80 million people around the world. Meanwhile, when you talk about renewables and wind turbines, they're blowing the tops of remnant vegetation vegetation that has never been cleared before, full of rare and threatened flora and fauna, and by multinational companies that are exempt from a lot of laws that farmers are oppressed by. They're exempt by the Vegetation Management Act, the reef regulations, and the Nature Conservation Act. So we just find it absolutely disgusting that governments, their corporations are allowing this rollout of renewables to happen. It's a free-for-all where farmers are being oppressed, and we get satellites flying over us all the time, monitoring what we do, and it is just disgusting, and it's getting worse by the day.
When I lived on the farm, when they had Ned Kelly as my neighbour, I'm not that old, but close to it, Dad would always, because whinge, our family, but farmers are renowned for whinging, but they have good reason to whinge. He would whinge about the decisions made by those in Cap City, those sitting in an office, for example, in Melbourne, in Spring Street, and in Queensland you've got right smack bang in the middle of cities, and New South Wales and stuff. Do you find that still now that for example, in Queensland, that is actually still run by these he would call them half-wits. So we'll stick with that. These people in government office, and they're still running, telling you how to run your farm. Do we still have that at the moment?
Definitely, and again, that is getting worse too, because there is a disconnection. It wasn't like even 25, 30 years ago where everyone knew someone in the country, used to go out and visit your uncle, your cousins in the bush, and you had a greater understanding. That's gone, Mike, and has been replaced by a lot of propaganda, again, coming out of these environmental groups, out of, more left-leaning governments that really want to tie us up and really brand us that we're affecting the environment. So, yeah, you've got bureaucrats in the cities, in council offices that have never stepped foot on a farm before, but they're telling you how to manage feral species, how to manage your land correctly when they've got no skin in the game, and it's very frustrating. Totally.
And we had yesterday, we focused a fair bit on the fire ant issue in Queensland, and we've had three examples of farmers being just decimated because of a decision to use these terrible chemicals. And then we had a professor on talking about there is another way. There's a machine that you fire deep into the ant's nest of boiling water, 90 degrees Celsius, and it stops them. And if you need to, you can go back again. No damage to the environment, whereas at the moment the pesticides or the insecticides are killing all sorts of small little animals and polluting the streams. That's one example of government getting it entirely wrong. How do we get them to see reason? Do we kidnap them and bring them out to the bush and plonk them in the middle of some prickles or ants or whatever, and say, now this is farming. This is what you need to do. The farmer looks after the environment, and by doing what you're telling us to do, we're destroying the environment. So how do we get that message to these people?
We've got to reconnect with them, and you're right. They need to get out of their offices and get their hands dirty, get a bit of red or black dirt on their hands, Mike. Get out there, talk to farmers, and build that relationship again. Because when you talk about biosecurity issues like fire ants, mate, the ants have won. They're not going to eradicate. This government keeps talking about eradication of fire ants, and that is just a furphy. You cannot eradicate a pest that is now spread over 880,000 hectares in a major population zone. We need to work on containment issues and learn how to live with these ants. Sure, we're all about containment, and you're right. I'm pleased you mentioned that non-chemical alternative where people need the choice. People are being forced to take these chemicals onto their property where people should have choice, and it should be more community driven. What we're seeing here is policy on the run by government's policy that doesn't include farmers. And so when the policy and legislation is rolled out, it doesn't work. And we are really concerned in the bush across a number of all agricultural sectors that our biosecurity system is failing, and we're in a lot of trouble. Like look at the pigs. We've got a massive locust plague potential this season because government has sat on their hands over winter and not intervene and help farmers get on top of it. And Mike, I can say now, we are going to see a severe locust plague this season in Queensland. That's going to decimate a lot of crops. And again, it's just because government hasn't got the skills it used to have, because it doesn't get its feet dirty. It doesn't get out in the bush and find out what's really going on. They'll sit in their offices and tap away at the keyboard.
And those locusts will create absolute mayhem, won't they?
Well, it'll be doom and gloom, the end of the world. Geez, it's part of climate change. Look, they never were, these locust plagues. It's only because that we haven't got onto them early. Look, I was part of a team, Mike, that actually, we were the only team 25 years ago that actually stopped a locust plague from occurring. I used to work for the government, based in central Queensland, and it's jumping on things early and making sure they don't climb their way up the invasion curve before there's millions and millions of hectares.
Yeah, I have a just funny little story. When I drove, I had a EJ Holden. It was a lowered one you do in those days. It was a pretty hot car, and I drove from Berry in South Australia right inland to go and see some people. And we had a locust plague. And man, I got to tell you, I look like a stew when I got back. And it could have been one thing. I could have either had a mini moke or a motorbike. That would have been even worse. Jim, if somebody wants to find out more about what you do or about Property Rights Australia, how do they do that?
Mate, if you just go into any of your search engines and pump in Property Rights Australia, our website will come up, and it's got a heap of information there, all the submissions that we've done. We've actually got a fighting fund for members that we can actually take government to court, where we find it where they're being pushed around and they're not meeting, government is pushing unfair legislation or decisions. And we've also got a very active Facebook site too. So get on board. There's always heaps of information, because people need to find out, where they stand with their property rights, because it's changing every day, it seems to.
Yeah, it's becoming this great maze. Soon we won't be able to get out. Jim Wilmott, thank you very much for your time. This is the Country Telegraph on The World Today.
We're today's news talk, The World Today.
And before we get into our next guest, Bill Stinson, I just want to talk about, I just want to show you how some of just a very short clip here, just to show that farming is not all toil and rolling the sleeves up, falling into mud or swallowing grasshoppers or, having cow pats on your head, nothing like that at all sometimes. Cam, can you play this clip? This is the Irish Open Golf was played next to this guy's property. It only goes for about 10 seconds, but it's a very funny little clip, and it just shows you there is a great side to farming. Cam, if you could play Irish.
Oh, there's one of the few spectators outside the bubble. He's got a few friends as well.
They're ready to steal his Kit Kat, I think.
Isn't that a fantastic picture?
Isn't it? Photograph that somebody quickly. That's brilliant. He's totally oblivious to them all being around. It's just like so much normality to him, isn't it?
There you are. I love that. I think it's fantastic. It shows you he has time for a cup of tea, which he would have been, watching the Irish Open in golf next to his farm. Absolutely brilliant. Bill Stinson, construction industries. Bill Stinson is in the construction industry. He's a professional and runs Let's Rethink Renewables. Bill Stinson, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. How are you?
Well, thank you. Can you tell me how you became involved as a renewable energy activist, for want of a better word?
Yeah, it started about 5 years ago, and I think it was at the CPAC meeting where I met some people who had lived on the northern beaches of Sydney, and they moved to Gulgong, and we started discussing what life was like out there, and then they started telling me about all of the solar projects and wind projects that were starting to decimate the land out there. So we started to communicate, and that grew. Other people came online, if you like, through email. And in August 23, I was speaking to some of the people in Dunedoo, and there was a committee being formed, the National Rational Energy Network, and I was asked if I would join that committee because I'm based in Sydney, and obviously there's a need to educate people in the big cities, about what's happening out in the country. So I joined NREN in August 23, and we then expanded. We became a hub for passing information on to community groups from North Queensland down through New South Wales to Victoria, Tasmania, across to South Australia, and there are some over in Western Australia. In March of this year, there was a group or a committee formed called Let's Rethink Renewables, and that came from some of the committee members who were working in Queensland and rolling out the Let's Rethink Renewables brand. So we formed that committee, and it continues to complement the work and work with NREN, and we're continuing to be activists.
Good on you. It's the farmer itself that actually is the one that's getting the, we would say, bum steer, getting the raw prawn, because these decisions are made generally by either very, very wealthy people, billionaires with large companies, or by government. They're either sitting in there, and I'm sure people, the local senators wouldn't be all that keen on most of the stuff that's happening. But if you look at the cabinet and of either the state governments or the federal government, they're all, they're for want of a better phrase, they're city slickers. They don't understand what is happening to the bush. And sure, we have a lot of land out there that you could plonk a few solar farms or wind turbines, but they're not. They're doing it on farmland. And except for the necessity of saying yes as a last measure, because I would think that most farmers they're all very, very good environmentalists. They know exactly what will happen. But if you need to get a few pennies in, you have to look where your next feed's coming from. And if it's from a wind turbine, well, then so be it, whether they agree with it or not. How do we stop the people sitting in their air-conditioned offices in all these major cities? How do we get the message through to them? Let the farmer be a farmer and let him get on with doing his job.
Well, Mike, we've got to push back against these people. And we take the point also in regard to solar panels, wind turbines and batteries. It's not here, there, nor not anywhere, because if you say to one group of people in a particular community, okay, you start pushing back against these things, and all they're doing is passing the problem over to another community. So you also look at the type of energy generation with wind, solar and batteries. Well, batteries don't generate electricity. They just save any so-called additional power that's produced by wind and solar. But you can't depend upon an energy generation system that depends upon the vagaries of the weather. I mean, we've got a first world economy, so you can't drive a first world economy using unreliable and unaffordable renewable energy. What we've got to get back to is the energy generation system that we used to have, and that's powered by gas, coal, and in the future, nuclear. And all we have to do in regard to nuclear is lift the prohibition at the federal level, lift the ban, and then let the market look after itself. Now, one other point that I would make is that when the government endorsed the 2015 Paris Agreement, Article 2.1b of the Paris Agreement says that governments should work to reduce emissions, provided that it doesn't threaten food production. But of course, this is ignored by the politicians, where they go out and they say, well, we don't mind you putting solar panels on productive farmland or using grazing land to put wind turbines on. When the agreement that they said that they would follow actually says where it doesn't threaten food production. So the people who are in governments, and New South Wales government actually passed legislation and left that particular clause out, they're hypocrites. You have the Greens senators down in Tasmania at the moment complaining about a wind project on Robbins Island that was approved by the federal government, and saying, "Oh, it's going to be killing the birds, native birds, etc., and should be somewhere else." But what are they saying? Well, what about the native birds on the Great Dividing Range in Queensland? What about the fauna on the Great Dividing Range in Queensland, where they're blowing off the tops of these mountains? I suppose one other point I make, in the construction industry, you have to go through the planning process of getting things approved. No such thing happens with these renewable energy projects. It's just carte blanche. And I think, as Jimmy Wilmott said before, farmers have an issue with having to cut down a tree on their property. But up in North Queensland and in these other places, they put wind turbines, they're cutting down hundreds of thousands of trees that have been there for millenniums, and nobody says anything.
What needs to be done? Because we've got to wrap this up. We've got a gentleman who we had on last night and we couldn't get to him. Can you just tell me briefly what needs to be done? And we'll go back to these questions in the next few days, if you don't mind, because they are too serious to ignore, because we are seeing decimation of the Australian landscape when it comes to farming communities, and they're also under threat. Just briefly, if you were the magic fairy, what would you do? What would you just to make things better, to get things back on track?
Maybe I shouldn't be a magic fairy. Maybe I should be a magic guy. Put it that way. But anyway, what I do? Well, obviously, you start to push against the politicians, and as Ian Plimer says, there's no better politician than a frightened politician. So what we've got to do is we've got to keep pushing back, like the farmers in Victoria, demonstrating, taking the message to the people in the cities. And where we're going to win this, our weapon of choice is our ballot, and our ballot ground is the ballot box. So just briefly, Mike, that's what we're going to do, just continuing to get the message out there and win the hearts and minds of people in the cities.
And if you wouldn't mind shutting down the ABC too, they're the greatest propagandists God ever created. And
no, mate, the ABC, they're all bloody communists. That's it.
They are. And anybody that disagrees with what's happening is a, what do they call them, cuckoos or...
deniers. We're deniers, mate.
Well, we're more the realist. Look, exactly. Always a pleasure chatting to you, sir. We have to have you on again. If somebody wants to find out more about what you do, how do they do that, Bill?
Let's Rethink Renewables, our website. It's www.letsthinkrenewables, all one group of words, .org.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time. Our next guest, we're going to talk about, thank you, sir. We're going to talk about, I have to say, one of the things is Bovaer, which is the stuff they give animals to stop them from farting. We'll just play this quick clip, and then I'll come back to our next guest, Roger Meadcock, one of the friends here at The World Today, and now for the Country Telegraph. Cam, can you play Bovaer?
Let's talk about Bovaer and methane inhibitors. Possibly the dumbest way to reduce carbon ever. There's been a massive backlash against Arla over the last few days because they were feeding a small number of their cows a synthetic chemical called 3-nitrooxypropanol, or Bovaer. Does it affect milk? Technically, yes. Is it unsafe? Probably not. But the facts don't matter. What is clear is that the public do not want this in their food chain. Arla and the retailers, your customers don't want to take the risk. And as a farmer, I want to say thank you to the British public, because the entire concept of methane inhibitors is fundamentally flawed and was going to cost farmers a fortune. Let me explain. Now, this might take some brain power, but stick with me. I promise you it's worth it. Methane inhibitors offer a capped benefit, but a recurring cost. A combination that is totally unique in the world of carbon reduction strategies. I have a calf has escaped. We'll continue this in 1 second. What is my life sometimes? Right, hold on to his head. Get him. Oh, you got him. As I was saying, methane inhibitors reduce the amount of methane entering the atmosphere. And because methane naturally breaks down to CO2 and water over 12 years, the pool of atmospheric methane gradually reduces. However, after 12 years, the pool of atmospheric methane has stabilized, which means that no further reduction is possible. Hence, you have a capped benefit. However, to maintain that benefit, you have to feed the additive indefinitely, forever. Hence, the recurring cost. So let's compare methane inhibitors to other carbon reduction strategies. Think about replacing a coal-fired power station with renewable energy. Once the coal plant is gone, the benefits keep growing year after year. It is a non-capped recurring benefit strategy. Or what about planting trees? As forests grow, they will capture CO2, but eventually they will reach a saturation point. They are capped. However, they only have a one-time cost up front and not a recurring cost. Methane inhibitors, on the other hand, have a capped benefit after 12 years and yet an incredibly high recurring cost, which is why they are so stupid. If farmers were forced to use methane inhibitors, it would be an ongoing eternal cost for a very limited short-term benefit. That's not sustainable financially or environmentally. Methane inhibitors just make zero sense, especially when there is much better, more cost-effective ways to address climate change rather than putting synthetic chemicals into the food chain. Hence why a lot of farmers are so pleased to see the public's backlash against this stupid idea. As farmers, we are constantly told that the consumer is king. New rules, new regulations, we are told it's because the consumer is demanding it. But now the consumer has spoke loud and clear. No to synthetic chemicals like 3-nitrooxypropanol in the food chain. And yet what happens? Retailers dig their heels in and refuse to listen. This has exposed the reality of the situation. Consumer demand is often just a convenient excuse for a small number of people to push their agenda onto family farmers like me. If the consumer really is king, I think it's time the retailers listened and dropped the insanity of methane inhibitors. They make zero sense. Like, factually, 0 cents. The fact they have even got this far tells me there must be a lot of money involved.
And I think he's pretty well spot on, but we'll find out more. Roger Meacock is a pioneer British vet surgeon with over 25 years of clinical experience, known for his forward-thinking approach to animal health. First of all, Roger, thanks for joining us. Bovaer, does it hurt the animal?
Hi, Mike. Good to see you again. The truth is, they don't know. I had first heard about Bovaer back in December 2024, and I contacted the veterinary medicines directorate here in the UK, sort of saying to them, "Why did you license this?" When, as far as I can see, there's no real benefit. And the climate aspect of it is a complete misnomer, like that chap was saying on the video. And they came back to me and they said, "Well, it's not a veterinary medicine, so we've had nothing to do with it." And actually, the Food Standards Agency were the ones that have licensed it as feed additive. And so, as it turns, I'm actually ended up getting a letter from the chief veterinary officer in the UK, where she admitted that they actually haven't got any studies done to check the health on the cows themselves in the long term. So there's no health and welfare assessment for the cows themselves. What the Food Standards Agency have done primarily is look at research data which was done on experimental rats. There was some done on cows, but the groups were so small they're not statistically significant, and for only a very short period of time. And then looked at if there was any evidence for what might happen to the people who might be drinking the milk. And so, the actual studies haven't yet been done. And that was being confirmed by Denmark government, who have actually initiated the proper study, which should have been done in advance. So the answer is they don't actually know how safe Bovaer is, but some of the evidence that they did see in the research, they've conveniently ignored, because there were some suggestions that there might be genotoxicity. So that might affect the genome and affect the genes. And there's also potential carcinogenicity, so cancer forming. But again, that only happened in a small number, so they discounted it. So, they've sort of interpreted what research that has been done, how they want to interpret it. And it's almost like they did the research to obtain the result they wanted to do, to push this through on the climate issue, when, as that chap was saying, that it really has no impact on climate to that degree, because there isn't a carbon molecule in a cow that hasn't come from CO2 in the air in the first place via the plants. So since when did completely recycling anything ever cause more problem at any point in the cycle, more than it did in the first place? And I just think it's ridiculous.
Well, it is, but these decisions we've determined, which I knew anyway because I did grow up on the land. The decisions are made by people. In your case, who I dare say have never worn a gumboot or a welly, and in Australia they wouldn't go out to the bush because there are big blowflies and it's dirty and it's dusty and it's just a terrible place to go out and get, to mix with other human beings. So they're making the decisions from within air conditioning and very comfortable premises and offices. However you pronounce it, Bovaer or Bovaer, whatever, are farmers using this more and more, or have they sort of given it the bum steer?
Well, I think Arla announced that they were going to do some trials on some farms back in December 2024. I think there was 30 farms involved in their trials, and there was a huge backlash from the public. Nobody wants it. So I dare say that the farmers, if they are adding it, aren't making it well known. So it's difficult to know. I don't know how much it is being used in the UK. I don't know if there's certain reasons to mandate here yet, but I know in Denmark, where there is a mandate, there have been some reports back from farmers saying that cows have died. It has caused mastitis, which is where you get an inflammation in the udder, and the milk goes a bit funny as a result, so they can't take it. And they've actually had some diarrhea and fever and all sorts of things. So there is evidence that this isn't good for cows, but it's being totally ignored. And I've passed that on to the Veterinary Medicines Directive here as well, and they've just basically ignored the issue. And I said to them, I've sent you more evidence, because there's more cows involved in Denmark that have actually had Bovaer. So many more numbers in what the information I've given you than you've got in the trial, and yet you're going by the trial, which is anecdotal at best, because there was only literally handful of cows in the trial. Well, you can't get any statistically significant result if you're only using that few numbers. So, as you say, there is another agenda. Decisions have been made, and it is just further evidence of net zero climate political madness, the agenda behind that, and also which includes the agenda to get rid of meat and dairy as well. So it's there is a bigger picture here, and that is actually what it's about. It's not about the cows and the methane anyway, because the methane level in the environment is 0.00019%, 3019%. So, to think that methane has that much effect. And there's a little known fact that people often forget with CO2 is that there is a cap to how much warming CO2 can actually provide. And we've already reached that limit. So the more CO2 you get in the atmosphere, it has no further impact on the warming. It's a little bit like having a semi-opaque tape across your window, and it lets some light in to begin with, but the more layers of tape you put across, eventually hits the point where no light is getting through, and you can add more layers of tape and it's not going to make any difference to the light coming into the room. And that's exactly where we've got to with CO2. We've already reached that point where there is no further warming by adding more CO2, and that, these are the sorts of facts which people need to be informed about, because then they'd understand that all this legislation and increase in bills and renewable energy and all the rest of it that they're trying to do to reduce it is a complete waste of time.
It doesn't seem, though, that the people pushing this climate change narrative are going to back away from this either. Who is pushing it? We've got only a couple of minutes left, 2 minutes left. Can you tell us, is government suggesting to farmers that they should do this with their livestock?
I think governments now are being controlled by non-governmental organisations and corporations. We've got sort of Mussolini's definition of fascism, where corporates and companies and investors are controlling government policy. And there is too much money invested in these technologies and the frankenfoods that they want to replace real food with, and all the rest of it. And it boils down to follow the money. And once you realise where the money has been invested and what the agenda is to control people and keep us sick by not allowing us good nutrition, which means that pharmaceuticals can be used more, and people who are sick on the whole aren't going to push back as hard as people who are fit. So there's all sorts of reasons and agendas at various different levels in various different industries behind it. And it is simply the amount of money that's been invested into it. Government now has probably made too much tax from it as well, but they don't want to see the truth. But that's the only thing that people can do is just push back and say no and refuse these things and make an issue of it.
Yeah, I think there are so many things at play at the moment. Just quickly, in Australia, we have a government in Queensland trying to get rid of the fire ants. So what they're doing is they've got these chemicals which they're destroying all the other natural the habitat on these people's farms, and they can quite easily be controlled by using very hot boiling water with a special machine that goes straight down into the ant's nest itself. But no, we're going to use chemicals, and if you don't, we're going to fine you, shut you down, do all sorts of things. So I think we need less government. Roger, if someone wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
Well, my main work website is naturalhealingsolutions.co.uk. I've also got my own sort of more political website, which is rogermeacock.com. And I've got a Substack as Natural Vet. So those are probably the main three places where people can catch me. I'm on Facebook as well, but those are my main websites.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, Roger Meacock. Thank you very much. Just beware those farting cows. You'll be killed with one as it flies past you. This is The World Today, and of course, the Country Telegraph tomorrow. We'll have more from the Country Telegraph, and coming up next, more political stuff, including we'll cross to Indonesia and also to Madrid in Spain. Thank you very much. Back shortly.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.